Hello everyone! It's been far too long. Welcome back once again to the Hand-Eye Society's annual Super Festival. If you're a longtime follower of Hand-Eye, then you'll know that I'm Jordan Sparks, Director of Technology and Workshop Coordinator here at the Hand-Eye Society. Welcome to the Super Festival Super Show. If you're new here, then welcome to our community. Founded in 2009, the Hand-Eye Society is one of, if not the oldest video game arts nonprofits in the world. We help out and showcase indie game developers all across Canada and the world, while supporting games as an art form, teaching people about video games, and doing other things for the gaming community. You can find out more about us at handeyesociety.com. You can also sign up for our upcoming online workshops on our Eventbrite page, where you can learn about game development with us from anywhere in the world. Super Festival has been our annual indie game festival over the past few years, combining our past annual festivals into one event full of games, special features, and talks from the live stream that you're looking at now. We hope you caught our special Saturday broadcast a few days ago, showcasing the Hand-Eye Society Ball. In addition to that, this year we'll be broadcasting every day starting from today, Monday, November 3rd, to Friday, November 7th, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Some talks will even be live on location at Interaccess in Toronto later this week. Want to find out more about Super Festival? Well, I got you covered. Be sure to check out our special Super Festival website at bit.ly/HES-Superfest. You'll get to see all the games in this year's festival, our stream schedule, and even our special Torontron map showing the locations of our fabled Torontron arcade machines scattered across Toronto. Go find them if you can. I'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsors and supporters who have made Super Festival possible. Thank you to Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, Clever Endeavour, Charitable Gaming, the Kennedy Road Charitable Gaming Association, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto, as well as the following contributors for their support and their donations in kind, to help make Super Festival 2025 even greater. We have an exciting first day of talks for you, so let's get this show on the road. Enjoy Super Festival 2025, and I'll see you later.
So it's been over a week since I arrived here, and I'm still not sure if this house is a gift or a joke. Every night I go to bed wondering who sent me this letter and this key, and I wonder why they did it. I'm leaving behind this tape recording in case I disappear or something happens to me.
The cars, birds, and trees are the key to entering this place.
Who are you? Are you behind all of this?
swear words and it's, jokes and everything like that. But, once I started playing it, like really playing it, that's when everything changed. I found these weapons and armor, I'd master them, and my character just kept getting stronger. And the attack combos, once I figured out how those worked, the power was unimaginable. But the story is what got me. It really sucked me in, and it showed me something about myself that I didn't even know was there. And now I don't think I can ever go back.
Sir, this is a liquidation store.
Oh, right,
The tide's rising. Wishlist sunken stones on Steam.
Well, sink me.
Hidden Duck Digital.
Clean getaway. Clean getaway.
Wayfarer 3, this is Mission Control. We're detecting high levels of hallucinogens in the atmosphere on Gliese 667C and abnormalities in your driver's vestibular system. Please take off and return to the nearest space agency outpost immediately.
Okay, left, go left. Wait, okay, down. No, stop hitting things. Wait. Ship is tilted left. Ribs, right, ribs. What left?
Just blend with my light. Forget that girl, fuck all those lights. I can see your future, it's looking bright. Just blend with my light. I put it in the ankle eyes. He knew I had to flee. He knew I had to free myself, and we know deep down we are meant to play.
This piece is called Beat Stacker. It's supposed to be kind of like a kid's introduction to making music and a little like hello to the creative process for kids in a really approachable way. So it's based off like a kid's block sorting game. You know, you sort the wood when you're a little kid, you have little blocks. So it's like that, except it introduces a musical aspect to it.
What I'm so impressed with is that this was exactly what you wanted to make. Yeah. And you like really followed through on like the clarity of your original vision is like right in front of you. It's really impressive.
So, hi there everyone. Welcome to this session on Accelerate Your Multiplayer Prototyping with Unity 6. My name is Esteban Maldonado and I am a developer advocate at Unity. So, in today's journey, we're going to be spending most of our time in this live demo where we're going to actually implement Unity multiplayer technology. We're going to be first installing all of the necessary packages that we need. We're then going to be converting a 2D platformer scene, which is the one that you see here in the GIF animation to the right. Then we're going to be implementing it little by little, multiplayer features, and then fully converting it into a multiplayer scene where we're going to be able to synchronize the necessary data that we see. Like for example, right there, you see that the jumps and the position, the animation, the drawing of the line renderer with the rainbow is really cute. So all of that, synchronizing all of that to make it into a shared experience. So we're going to be testing with those virtual players that you see, those two windows up and down. And then we're going to be taking the scene online. So our final result will actually be able to play the game over the internet and not just locally in the sync computer. And then last but not least, after the live demo, very quickly, I'm going to share some additional resources, and in fact, even including the project that you're going to be seeing throughout the presentation. So, all right, now let's go into Unity 6. Okay, so here we are in Unity 6. This is gonna be this is the project that we're going to be using across the presentation. So let's actually play our scene that we have here called Start Here. That is going to be the 2D platformer with no multiplayer features in it whatsoever. So I'm gonna hit play real quick here. Okay, so as you can see, give it a little bit of a better view. So here we have our little character. You know, we can walk around side to side. Notice that the little character has some animations when he's running, idle, and even jumping. In fact, so it flips direction in the X direction, the sprite, whenever you go ahead and jump. Okay, so like your typical 2D, old school 2D platformer, all that good stuff. Look at that awesome jump with that awesome rainbow. So now let's say that I want to go ahead and convert this into a multiplayer experience, right? So I want to go ahead and share this with a friend or a coworker because, you know, I want to be able to play together, right? So let's go ahead and do that right now. So let's stop playing the scene and show you how to install the necessary packages that we need in order to do that. The first step that we need to do is we need to go over here in Window, into Multiplayer, and there's this new section right here, Multiplayer, and there's a little tool over there called the Multiplayer Center. So let's go ahead and choose it over here. And now we get this new window. So starting in Unity 6.0, this tool has actually been out for a little while, but still very, very useful. Now, the Multiplayer Center helps us to install the multiplayer packages that we need based on the kind of shared experience that you would like to create. So if we go over here, the first thing that we're going to do is selecting the genre of our game. Let's actually go ahead and zoom in so that you can better see the different options that we have available. So we have something like adventure, platformer, sandbox, arcade. So pick the category that matches the kind of project that you want to create, or as close as possible. This is really more to get like an idea of what kind of shared experience you want to create. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this category because, you know, it is platformer right there. I want to create a multiplayer platformer game. Now the next option is going to be number of players per session. So what it actually means is that we're determining the amount of concurrent players in a session. So the players that are going to be playing together. And you see that there are multiple options like 2, 4, 8, but that's not really like our hard requirement. That's just to get an idea of what kind of game you want to create. Like for example, if I were to choose something like 16 players, I could go ahead and still just make a 5-player game or a two-player game, and that's it. But just to get an idea, so I'm going to go ahead and choose something like 4. So Okay. Oh boy. So definitely now we definitely see that this window is much more populated. So now the cool thing is that by default, based on the settings that you set, like these default recommendations are actually good to go. You can actually go ahead, and the next step would be to install your packages. But as an exercise, like I encourage you to, like, when you try it at home, feel free to like choose between different genres, so you see what kind of recommendations you get. Like, for example, car battle games or turn-based games might not necessarily need like that real-time synchronization because it's turn-based, so you don't need a lot of that constant back and forth communication. So that could be a potential way that you implement this game. But if we go ahead into something like a simulation, see, we get again the recommendation of our net for game objects, but that could change depending on how many players you have, or like what kind of type of game you have. So here our actual netcode changed to netcode for entities. So let me set this back to how I had it. And one thing, I mentioned netcode for entities and netcode for game objects, but what is a netcode? A netcode is an actual layer of code that you add to your game in order to start synchronizing the necessary data in between the connected players that are playing together. Like, for example, when the characters were jumping, or make sure that both players see that the right player is moving at a particular position, rotation, or they're showing the right animation. So that netcode solution is what makes that happen, that synchronization happen, alongside with obviously the actual internet connection. But it gathers the necessary information for you to make that synchronization happen. So, like I mentioned, the next step would be to go ahead and install the packages that you need, and it'll start to one by one installing everything. So right out of the bat, we're already saving some time, even when knowing what gathering information of what tools we need to install. So I've already gone ahead and installed all of the packages for you, for us ahead of time, right? So I can go ahead and skip ahead to start using the actual packages. So let's go ahead and close that window, and now we're going to be creating this first object, which is we're going to be creating a new empty object, and we're going to call it the network manager. Now this game object is going to hold a very important component, and it's going to be this one, the network manager, right? There we go. Oh. So our network manager, let me give it a little bit more space. So our network manager, think of it like our main entry point for our network session to happen, for that synchronization to start happening. And so a player could actually kick off a network session, or a client or another player could join an existing session. But either way, like the main entry point for either of those scenarios is through the network manager. So we go ahead and we see this little warning that says you had no transport selected, right? So the transport would be that even lower level layer that you probably heard in other games, seeing like, oh, sending packets of data in between clients. So the netcode, remember that I told you that is the layer of code that grabs necessary information like position, rotation, or certain other data that makes players change visually in between player sessions, right? So the transport is like the layer that takes that data from the netcode and splits it up into into those packets of data. So we have a couple of options here, but I'm gonna go ahead and proceed with our default Unity transport. And now, as you can see, we have a transport layer that'll take that data from the netcode and split it up in packets and send it and receive other packets, send to other players and receive from other players, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and actually check our little player here. We're no longer going to need it because we don't want our player to appear right out of the bat when no network session has started, right? Because if there's no synchronization yet, then we don't technically need our player. However, we can actually go ahead and test this right now. So the netcode, the network manager now has these 3 buttons enabled, which is start host, start server, or start client. And those options mean that start host means that you're going to start a new network session, but you're going to be acting as a player as well. So you're going to be the host of the session, but you're also being a participating player. Start server meaning it's just you're going to be a server listening in to requests from other players that want to join your session. And start client means to just join an existing session. So I'm gonna go ahead and start as a host. Now, technically, you know, nothing is currently happening right now, but we've already actually kickstarted a networking session. So right now we are already ready to listen to incoming connections from other players. Just that we need to make our player appear, right? We need to some sort of avatar or player to represent us as we're playing the game. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the host, stop listening for incoming connections, stop playing the game. Now I'm gonna go ahead and set our player. So if you notice, this field in the network manager is called the default player prefab right here. And the default player prefab is the prefab that is going to be instantiated once the network session starts, and it's going to be the player that we're going to be controlling. So I deleted the copy of the prefab that we had here, but let's actually take the original file, drag it over here, and it's this prefab player start here. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and try that again. So as this loads, what I'm going to do is that I am going to press the start host button like I did before, but however, pay attention because this is not gonna work right now. I press start host and I immediately see a null reference exception. Let me actually zoom in over here and we see player start here. So the prefab has no network object assigned to it. Okay, cool. Expected that. Let's actually go ahead and fix that, because that means that we need to prepare our player prefab for synchronization. Okay, so let's go and double click here, and we've opened our player prefab, and cool, we see that we have our player. We have the child object that has the little line render with the rainbow. Pretty cool. So here we have some components that we recognize, you know, transform, everybody knows that one. Sprite render, animator, you know, like, okay, all well and good. And we have also the script player controller underscore netcode. We're definitely gonna spend a little bit of time in that script later. But however, there's a component that we're missing here that is very important, and that one is the network object, right? So the network object, think of it like and by the way, it's included in with the netcode for game objects netcode layer, right? So the network object, think of it like a component that tells the network manager, okay, this object is cool, like it's gonna be participating in the network session, and we are going to synchronize data up on that object. Kind of think about it kind of like the network manager being like a bouncer in a party, and the prefab is trying to get in the party, but the network you need the network object, or you know, to be in the list to be included, right? So the network manager sees, oh, okay, cool, you're on the list, you got a little tag, you're a network object, all right, cool, proceed to the party. Any other prefabs? Sorry, you're out. So we got our little tag for our network object. Let's go back and play the scene again. And this time, it should actually appear when we start the host. Okay. Cool. Now let's select our network manager over here on the hierarchy. We press start host, and look at that. Check it out. Now, what's actually going on is that we kickstarted a network session, but we actually have a player to control and represent us as a player, like a little player avatar, like I mentioned. If I go ahead and stop host, you'll see that our player gets removed. And I believe that is, if I start it again, cool. Go ahead and control it and start a new session. Okay, cool. So now it would be a good time to see if we could actually test it with another person, right? It seems like, all right, cool. So if you give this project to another person, well then, yeah, that might be good, right? Like, I think that we should be good. We give it to another person, they should be able to join us, right, in the session. Yeah, no, not yet. So we need to do a couple steps before. Now, we need to go ahead and bring another player to test this side by side, which is very common, especially when you're starting out in multiplayer games. And in the past, and when I say in the past, I actually mean in 2022.3, you actually needed to go into File, into the build settings, which we didn't even have build profiles by then. And by the way, if you haven't checked out build profiles, so in the past, before Unity 6, every time you wanted to build your game for Windows, Linux, Android, whatever, you actually had to manually switch all of your scenes and then build. And if you wanted to build again for another platform, you had to rearrange all the scenes and build for that platform, for that newer platform. Where now we actually have build profiles, and build profiles are settings of settings for what kind of scenes you want to include in that particular platform. Well, scenes and other settings. But as you see, I have here my Mac OS build profile. Obviously, it won't work because at the moment, because I don't have the hardware. I'm in a Windows machine. But here we have my active build profile, which is the Windows machine. So, but again, back to my point. In the past, before Unity 6, you actually had to build the game, wait a couple minutes, however long it took, and then play the game side by side, like I showed in the beginning, that little GIF animation when you had the two players. So, no. Now in Unity 6.0 and onwards, you actually have this very cool tool. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go again into Window. I'm gonna go into my multiplayer section again. And this time I'm going to choose the multiplayer play mode tools, which are really cool. So, okay. And here we have our next tool that I'm gonna show, which is our virtual player. So what we're going to be doing is that instead of building the entire game, no, what we're going to do is that we're going to spawn like a copy of your project, but it's going to be a limited copy because it's only going to be for playing purposes. So when I say limited, I also mean that it's actually much light and much more lighter to run. And even in case you need to restart it or something, well, it's a very much faster workflow. So you don't need to make an entire copy of the editor for testing purposes. So, and you can bring up to 3 additional players onto your machine. So let's go ahead and activate player 2. And what's going on at the moment is that that copy of Unity that is for playing purposes is being created in the background. Takes a little while, like a couple seconds to get started. But the cool thing is that when you spawn this, you can actually continue your development and keep that second player ready to go whenever you make changes in the main editor, and then you go back and test again with your virtual player. And here we go. So technically this is a recorded talk, but you're actually seeing the thing live. I could have done like a cool transition, but why not? It worked in real time. Okay, so let's go ahead, and if we see, we actually don't have like I mentioned, this is not this is your copy of your project, but it's not a full editor version, right? So we don't have this same start host button that we've been using so far. So I'm actually gonna go into my prefabs folder, and I have this little prefab right here that I pre-made called localhost UI. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag it, and now I have this UI that can actually interact with the network manager. It searches for a network manager and starts host or start client. Basically like a way of exposing the functionality of these buttons, of the start host and the start client. Now, check it out. Look to your right as I do this when I save the scene, but when I save the scene and I go here into my virtual player, bam. This is one of the coolest things and the coolest features and why I love this tool. As soon as I save in the main editor, this thing is already synchronized and ready to go. So let's go ahead and test our scene now. And let's test with our virtual player side by side. And you also have the little music right here. And check it out. You also have like the same stats that you have in the game mode window, right? So this is the cool thing. Like, think about it. You even have gizmos and everything. So think about it. Those kind of debug features, if you wanted to have them in your development build, you needed to basically like rebuild them again in your build. Have some kind of key combination to enable that kind of data. But no, you get it for free because, like I mentioned, it's a copy of your project of the game scene. And even you have like your little console log windows and everything. So cool. Let's go ahead and start the session like we did before. Start host. And let's go ahead and start the client. And okay. We're doing a little bit of progress, right? We have our characters and they're jumping, but we are controlling both of them at the same time, right? So we need to go ahead and fix that, but we are headed there. Remember, we started with nothing appearing. Now, okay. Let's actually make that isolation happen right now, because we need to be able to have each player control their own character independently. Okay, so let's go back into our prefab and go back, keep working where we were at, and gonna go ahead and add more components over here. Now, the first one that I'm gonna go ahead and add is this one, client network transform. So the client network transform helps us to actually synchronize and send the actual transform data. So let's go ahead and add that component, client network transform, and check it out. So if we go a little bit and investigate a little bit into this component, we see that we have data that we synchronize. We have other settings, but let's pay attention into these axes to synchronize. Now, you can actually, by the way, I never recommend that you pre-optimize before you actually keep testing and everything. But this is one exception that I can let go, because at least, for presentation purposes. Because one thing that you can do with this component is that you can go ahead and eliminate data that that is not going to be synchronized. And as you know, like, position, rotation, scale, like, has a lot of data. These are 9 floats that we'd be sending consistently over and over. But for example, I can go ahead and remove the scale and not send the scale data over, because I know that my character is never going to grow or shrink, right? It's never going to change in size. So why send that data if I know it's always going to be the same? Same with the X rotation or the Y rotation. I really, my character is never going to make that flip. I mean, it is going to flip, but it's going to be doing it through the sprite editor. So I don't really need to send that X rotation or that Y rotation. I might maybe do a little bit of camera facing rotation, with the Z axis, but not in this demo. And the position, we are in a completely 2D game. So I'm not ever going to have my character move forward or backward. So right there, we can actually even optimize a little bit of what data that is never going to change. We can avoid sending. And I know that the X and Y position is definitely gonna change. So I definitely leave that on. So the other component that I want to go ahead and add right now is this one, the network rigid body 2D, network rigid body 2D, in order to react to triggers or collisions, across the network, right? So let's go ahead and play our game again. Save. Remember, we need to synchronize our second player that we have lying around. This is the only thing that might actually take a little bit longer. It's because technically we are doing two domain reloads because we have two projects, but much faster than actually having to rebuild every time. So let's go ahead, start host. Okay, so far so good. And let's actually start our client and check it out. Now we have the isolated movement, but we're not there yet, right? Look at this right here. Like, they're behaving in this zoom mode. I cannot control it, but you can see that the animation changes is actually happening on the same character, and on the screen on the left, even though I'm controlling player 2, the version of player 2 is still on its idle animation. So we're getting there. We're definitely doing some progress. Let's go ahead and keep working on our prefab. So I'm gonna go ahead, open the prefab again. And one more component that I know I need to add here. Remember, one of the things we want to do is synchronize animations. So here we have a client network animator, which helps us to synchronize animations, right? And it needs a reference to a regular animator. So I'm going to go ahead and set that right now. And I will say I'm gonna do this step real quick, which is that the client network animator, we need a reference to it in this player controller script that we're gonna investigate later. So I'm gonna go ahead and set that right now. So now our player script has the reference to the network animator, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and save that prefab, and let's go ahead and play the scene one more time. See, this is the two domain reload bars that we get. Okay, so let's go ahead, play them again. And I think, by the way, one game that you can actually play with me here is try to count like how many times I've actually in the past, if I weren't using this tool, like how many times I would have needed to rebuild the game. And I think I am like at 4 or 5 right now. So okay, so I went ahead and said that it's not that different. So we need to do a little bit. We need to do now a little bit of code work, right? So I'm gonna take this opportunity and go into the code side of the netcode functionality, because we did set up the component correctly, the animation component, but there's a little bit of code that we need to do. And trust me when I say, I mean when I say a little bit. So let's go ahead and stop playing the game right now and back into our prefab. So I'm gonna go ahead and add one particular component here, which is going to be this one. Hey, camera, look at me. Because remember, so far the camera, the players have been moving, but we need the camera to follow around each particular player, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and add the script, and I'm gonna go ahead and use this to go into my code editor in order to look at how we can actually implement some of the netcode functionality in code version. So let's go ahead and zoom in here a little bit. For this script, I think we can zoom in a little bit more because it's a little bit short. Okay, so here we have this script called hey camera look at me _ network, right? So I have it currently inheriting from model behavior, and this is the workflow that we all know and love. I'm gonna go ahead and eliminate that. I'm gonna bring in the network behavior, because the network behavior is the model behavior version, but of multiplayer. And in fact, this class does inherit from mono behavior. So you still have some of the you still can access some of that base functionality from mono behavior if you want it. Now, here what we see that this code is doing is that all we're doing really is getting a Cinemachine camera object. We're doing this call one time in the start function, and then we're going to be setting to that Cinemachine camera, we're setting the target to be the transform, so the owner of the script. Now, this works perfectly fine in an offline game, right? The only difference is that we now have to introduce this line right here. If we are not the owner, don't do anything. So why am I introducing the concept of ownership, right, in multiplayer? Because remember, like I mentioned, we need to isolate and we need to make player 1 control their own avatar, their own player, and player 2 control their own avatar. But this is one of the fundamental things that, like, a lot of times can throw off a little bit people that are beginning. But what we're really doing here is that if we are not running from the device where we control our player, so if we are updating player 1, but we are not updating from the device of player 1, then don't do anything. And the same thing for player 2. So as long as we are player 1 and we are in the player 1 device or machine, then that's where we can proceed. And the same thing with player 2. So I'm gonna go ahead and save the script. Let's go back into the editor. I'm gonna save the prefab as well. Okay, so I believe that Unity might have reloaded the domain already. Cool. So let's actually go ahead and try it. Bring our player 2. Thank you. And let's start as our host and start the client. And there we go. Now our little camera is following along, and it's not moving on the other side. And here the camera on our device is actually following my own player. Right, so we've correctly applied ownership. And by the way, to further illustrate this concept of ownership, there's this very cool tool in the scene where, in the scene view, that let me actually maximize this so that you can get a better view. And you have these cool tools, network visualization, and you can see like bandwidth, like how much data is being sent and recovered. And you have this other one right here, which is ownership. Now, as you can see, we have the two characters right there, player 0 and player 1, right? And look below, the player 0 is actually the server or the host, and player 1, the sort of like violet color there, is a client that is only joining to play. Now, let me see if I can actually show this. So I'm actually selecting player 1 right now, and I'm gonna go ahead and modify the transform. Now check it out. I'm trying, but I can't because I don't have ownership over that one. Now, if I go ahead and select player 0, there we go. I can modify it all that I want. And I actually kind of broke the game, but you get the idea. I can modify because I am running from the correct device. And I think I can go ahead and fix this. Yes, I can. Check it out. Okay. But with that, I can actually prove that since I have ownership, I can go ahead and move it. So this is a really cool tool to help visualize that concept of ownership, right? So, okay, let's go back into trying to solve the problem that we're gonna fix, which is the synchronization of animations and the other visual aspects like sprite flipping and all that. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of more time in code. Now, this is the file that we were looking at. Okay, we already did that one. Now let's go into our player controller. So we see that we have our the script right here called player controller _ netcode. So similar to before, basically saying a player controller that is using netcode features. So we're going to first convert this and start using the right netcode class. So there's this kinematic object that it came with the 2D platformer template that I used for this, for this project. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to bring in this kinematic object underscore netcode, which really all it has is the same functionality to like calculate the physics and the movement and everything. The only difference is that I did the same if we are not the owner, then don't do anything check. But that's all it is. Everything else, I left it exactly the same, right? So let's go into our player controller netcode. And okay, so we need to do a couple of changes over here. So let's first go into the animation properties. So here we are. Yeah, there we go. That looks really good. Quite close enough. Now, here we have our reference to our animator that we were using, and here we have a reference to this client network animator. That's the netcode version that we added earlier. So now we need to first change this property right here. We're going to be accessing the animator through the client network animator. That's really, when I mentioned that, we need to do a little bit of code change. That's it. And now we are fully using the client network animator to synchronize animation states. So, and this is a little property getter that I did so that it's a very quick and easy change and for presentation purposes. Okay. Now let's actually move on to the jumping properties for those jumping states, right? Okay, so we have this public jump state enum that has grounded, but it actually can be like in flight, landed, jumping, grounded, all that good stuff. This is our our single player version. I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out and gonna bring in this new multiplayer version because one of the features of netcode for game objects is having network variables. Now, network variables are these generic variables that help you to synchronize data, and as you can see, it's like a template version. You can synchronize right out of the bat, ints, floats, basic data types, and even collections and everything. But that for collections, it takes a little bit of more work, and you can find that in the documentation. But at least like all of this basic data types right out of the bat, you have synchronization that kickstarts as soon as you start using the player prefab. So, and one thing that you need to set in your network variable is who has access to read the data or see the data. And by default, you can set it to everyone, but you can go ahead and just say only the owner has access to read the data. And the write permissions can actually, only the owner or a server can write the data and edit the data, okay? So, and then of course the default value that you give it. Now we see that I have a compilation error, and that's expected because yes, the usual way would be that you actually can just, if you have a property like this, you can have your getter and your setter. But if you want to access whether it's reading or writing the value, you need to use this internal property of the .value property. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix that over here as well. And there we go. This is essentially, you know, well, not essentially, this is how you actually can read the value from a network variable or edit it right here. And you don't have to always do it through a property. You can just, you can do direct assignments. It's just, again, for this is just like an easy change for presentation purposes. So, and here's another example of the network variable. So I have this variable for isFlip, which we're going to be using for whether the character needs to be flipped and at the sprite for visuals. So I'm gonna go ahead and uncomment the offline version or the single player version, and I'm gonna bring in the network variable version, right? So basically same name, same everything, and same thing right here. I have another property for presentation purposes. This is not production code, and you need to introduce again the .value property. And now we have our jumping properties in multiplayer version. We need to do a little bit of more work here. We're going to uncomment this block of code because we need to bring in this function, which is the on-network spawn function. So this function is basically like the multiplayer version of when your game starts, right? So this is like a function that gets called every time a character or a network or synchronized character comes into play. Whether you're controlling the character or not, you can take advantage of this function. And here's another cool feature of the network variables. As you can see, there's also an on-value change event that whenever the character is flipped or the jump state changes, you can react to that with some callback functions. And what we're doing right here is that whenever, let's say for example, on this one, on the player jump state, when we go ahead and jump, if we are in flight, set the trail to emit to true. So whenever we are jumping, make sure that you are emitting the line render and emitting the rainbow. And when we are flipped, when the owner flips his character or changes direction, then we need to update the flip status of the sprite. And so basically, if you are the owner and you're player 1 and you jump and then you change direction, player 2 will get a notification or an event that says, oh, the player 1 flip. You should flip your version of player 1. And that way it looks synchronized across both devices. And the last code change that we're going to do right here is the same thing that we did before. We want to only update our player when we are the owner of the player, right? So let's go ahead, and since we have updated all of that, let's go back into Unity, which is currently loading the domain. And again, taking a little bit longer because we have technically 2 editor instances, even if it's just for playing and for testing purposes. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and play it again. And I think that by now we should actually be done and be synchronizing everything. Okay, let's bring in second player. Thank you. And here we have player 1. We have our camera following, emitting the rainbow and everything. Now let's join as the client and check it out. We are right there. We have reached our goal of synchronizing our player data. Camera follows, the animation states are correct, the flip status of the animation are correct, and cameras following, like I mentioned, camera following every player correctly. So if I go ahead and move over here and jump, and oh, there we go. Those are my platforming skills right there live. But you get the idea. If I would have made the jump though, would have been on the other side. All right, cool. So we have gone ahead and synchronized everything, right? But there's one goal that we haven't completed yet. And it's the one that I mentioned at the beginning, which is to test our scene online. Because so far, this UI of Start Host, Start Client is very limited. We've only been testing locally in my current machine where I'm recording this presentation right now. And you're probably wondering, like, dude, okay, but I mean the talk is almost over. Like, how are you gonna do that in like a couple of minutes? Well, challenge accepted. All right, let's go ahead and see what we can do. So, okay, we have, like I mentioned, we have our limited UI over here, Start Host, Start Client. There's no multiplayer game that you play that only has those 2 options as UI. So we need to have a way for players, to find each other and actually join, whether it's through a lobby or a common ground before you start and play the game, right? Okay, so this is where Unity's gaming services comes to play, because now we actually need to connect over the internet. And in fact, let me actually show you real quick how you can set up your editor project to use a Unity Cloud project, right? So let's go here into Edit, go into Project Settings. My little window pop over here. And there is a Services section over here. And, oh, there we go. It was refreshing in the background. In the services section, you will find the instructions in order to link up your project into a proper cloud project. So you see that there is a Unity organization that we have right here. This is the organization that we have for Unity Developer Relations, but you have a default organization whenever you create your Unity account. So you will find your organization, and then you can create a project or a new cloud project, or use an existing one. And then you'll find the instructions to link your project, but it should look something like this. So after you go ahead and link your editor project to a Unity Cloud project, let's go ahead and you can right click over here and go into this section, which is the multiplayer widget section. Now, remember that I told you that we need like a new UI in order to actually have people create a lobby, join, and then kickstart the gameplay, right? So in the past, and again, I mean, even in version 2022.3, you needed to go ahead and recreate all of that boilerplate code of UI, of finding creating a lobby, listing a lobby, and all that. But no, now you actually have these pre-made UI elements, which are called multiplayer widgets, and you have one right here, like for example, to create a session. And in fact, let me go ahead and hide this localhost UI because we don't need it at the moment. And see, we have our session name text box and a little box to create it. Let's go ahead and get a little bit a better view of the UI. So I'm going to go ahead and move that element over there. Now we can you can go ahead and investigate like all the kind of types of widgets that we have, but I'm going to go add ones, some quick ones that I really like. This is a list box where whenever you create a lobby or somebody else creates a lobby that has access to your project, you'll see the list of sessions readily available over there. So I'm gonna go ahead and test this right now. I did save the scene, right? All right, cool. Because with this, we should actually already be able to connect over the internet and create a session. And like I mentioned, check it out. Yet another time that we've avoided having to rebuild the game again. So I'm gonna go over here, gonna write something like, the zoom mode doesn't let me type, so I'm gonna call it something like session 1. I'm gonna go ahead and create a session. Now, after I click this button, what's happening is that the game requested the Unity's gaming services to make a lobby for me. Okay, so far so good. And here we go. We have our session list right here. And remember at the beginning that I wanted to do a platformer game where up to 4 players can join? Well, there we go. And now here our client, instead of joining as start client, we can just join our session. And then it's requesting to join. And here we go. We are already playing over the internet. And there we go. In a matter of like maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes or something. And that's because I'm actually explaining what I'm doing. But basically in a matter of seconds, I already had my game ready to go, ready to connect, and ready to be a shared experience. So if I were to share this with somebody, I could actually play over the internet with them right now. So the last thing I wanted to show you here is that even though I created these 2 little widgets, I have this other UI called widgets, which has a more elaborate UI. And as you can see, there's definitely more objects listed here. There's even like a join button that you can have put like either a public or private lobby code and join. If somebody wanted to create a private lobby, we have the list of players and even some text chat as well. So let's go ahead and try that right now. Okay. And again, our trusty virtual player already ready to go. So this time, oh no, I didn't put the quick session, but okay, let's actually go ahead and make session 2. Same as before. So now we have our player list over here. Here we have like a little randomized name that we were given, feisty understanding dot number 7. All right, cool. So here we have like our lobby code that was created. So I can go ahead and copy this and then go into the client, copy the lobby code, okay, and join from there. Oof, it did not. Oh, okay. Oh, I got an error, but okay, I guess it wasn't lobby related. Okay. But cool, there we go. I was able to join through the regular lobby code. And last but not least, because why not? I'm writing a quick message like, hello. Sending it over the text chat. And, nope, write the message first and like, hi. There we go, hi. Can send it over like a little reply. And there we go. Even with some text chat and everything. So with that, I actually end the live demo portion of my presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. So let's actually go back to the slides to finish up and give you ways for you to actually try this today if you want it. Okay, so I wanted to quickly go over some additional resources that you can use for further learning. Okay, so we have a ton of content and even pre-made projects that sample projects that actually help you to get started with your multiplayer journey. And in fact, not only do we have regular sample projects like the bite-sized samples, we have a free introduction to multiplayer networking in Unity, which actually also covers netcode for entities as well, in case you wanted to make a DOTS multiplayer game. But we also have a very cool VR multiplayer template that is ready to work right out of the bat, and then as a solid starting point, and then you can proceed and add your own interactable elements. Same with a mixed reality template, which both the VR template and the mixed reality template have been featured in live streams and other presentations, which are, again, I say this personally, both of these templates, I've used them for my own development and learning, and they're simply amazing. I wanted to quickly go over how to try the sample at home when you get it, when you clone and download this project from our GitHub repository. So let me go back to Unity right here. So here is the project, that you just saw in the same starter scene, where you'll find the little character ready to go. This is the one that has no multiplayer features tied to it. Now, if you go into this folder right here, which is assets Esteban, you'll see that there are 2 scenes. So this is the one that we've been working on, start here. But if you click on this one, 2D platformer _online, now we've actually changed the scene, and here we go. You actually have the menu that we've been testing with most of the time in the presentation. In case you wanted to bring the other UI, the one with the widgets that I showed, you can actually go over here into the network manager _UI. There's already a prefab instance of that, and you can enable that widgets UI game object and disable the local host one. And there we go. You will get the same UI that you had that we left off when we were playing online. So I'm gonna go ahead and reverse that. So So this is how you'll find it. And then if you play this scene, I believe that the virtual player should still be active. So same thing as that you already saw like 17 times already. And start the host. Cool. And there we go. So last but not least, I wanted to say thank you very much for your attention today. And yeah, if you'd like to reach out, in case you have any questions, I have my website, estebangamedev.com. I also have my LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Those are the ones that I use the most in terms of social media. But for game development, but I have my work email, and I also left there the Unity Solutions multiplayer. So to access the learning resources, like even how to access the project that I showed today, feel free to scan that form. Now, I will say any feedback that you have is definitely more than welcome. You don't have to fill out the form in order to get the resources. You can just skip all the way to the end. So I don't like to force people to fill out forms, but I definitely want to get you the resources to help empower you in your development journey. So I care about that the most. So, but of course, any feedback is definitely more than welcome. So thank you very much.
wait for me! Whew. I'm Marco. Nice to meet you. Wait a minute. You're Ava, right? I mean, the Ava?
Do they understand what you're doing?
You mean climbing? There's no way they could get it.
The mountain is in my gut, deep inside. There's only the mountain.
Humanity is driven by curiosity. We are never satisfied with what we have. We never stop gathering. We build. We expand. We explore. But we are not the first civilization to arrive here. We all share a similar path. But will we have a different future? We will build our own wonder.
Hello, and welcome to my talk on how to use assets to improve your game at the Hand-Eye Society Super Festival. A bit about me before we really get started in talking about assets. Hi, I'm Devin. I'm a solo game dev. I have over 10 years experience in game development. About 5 of those have been developing my own solo titles under the Devs Game label. That's me on the right there. I've worked at a few different places in the AAA and indie space. I also have my BA in game design, and in my free time, I make art of various types and variety. Some stuff that I've worked on, I worked in the indie space for a bit. One of the titles I helped work on there was Riverbond for an indie studio in Toronto called Coco Cucumber. Then I worked as a level designer on Far Cry 6 at Ubisoft Toronto. I also published 2 of my own games in, like, I guess it's a franchise now, but franchise called Bombing, which is kind of a creative paint anywhere graffiti series where you walk around a city and paint a bunch of stuff. One of my most recent titles is Centauri Dark, which is an anti-fascist bullet hell arena shooter where you play as a mech and blow up a bunch of other mechs. And there's a few other things in here that I haven't mentioned that I've also worked on. I've published a tabletop RPG and a bunch of other stuff, but yeah, that's kind of so you can see my range as a developer and a designer. Worked on a bunch of stuff. And this is my current project, Scrub Squad, which is an interdimensional multiplayer cleaning adventure where you play as a bunch of aliens who go around and just clean up messes all over the dang universe. So before I start talking about assets, just a quick disclaimer. I want to emphasize that a lot of this is based on my own experiences in game development, both as a solo developer and working on teams. There's no real right or wrong way to make a game. Just really want to emphasize that point. Like, what I say here is based entirely on my own experience. So your mileage might change based on whether or not your project is commercial or personal or what your goals or objectives are with it. So take what I say with a grain of salt. So some stuff we're going to talk about. I'm going to go over what game assets are, just conceptually, why you might want to use them, how it's beneficial to your pipeline to do so, how to find good assets, and where to find them, some notes on copyright and crediting, and then I'm going to go over 3 tips on how to use game assets effectively in your game development. All right, let's dig in. Let's talk assets. So what is a game asset? What does it mean when I say a game asset? Generally, that just means a piece of content. It can be code, textures, 3D models, sprites, scripts, and anything like that, really, UI, audio. In this talk, when I talk asset, usually I'm meaning more like a pre-made piece of content, not made just for your project, but more generically, you can buy them online or find them for free online if people just host them for free, open source. But typically anything can become a game asset as soon as you put it in a game. Here's some examples. We have a wonderful city, some RPG UI, and a GIF of a hot dog that is transparent that I thought looked really cool. And I saw that and wanted to put it in my game immediately. All of this could be and is game assets. For my games, of all the games I've made, I want to emphasize that like 70%, I would estimate, of the content that makes it in the game that the end user sees is usually pre-made assets of some kind. Some examples are like texture painting systems for Bombing. I've used settings menu for things like UI and options. Dialogue systems have been entirely frameworks that other people have built. Nav mesh for like character movement and AI movement. Visual effects packs. I don't make a lot of VFX myself. I use things that people have already made. And pretty much all of my sound effects and 3D models to, yeah, like most of it. I think like if I had to guess, like 3% of what I put into my games for 3D models are my own, and everything else is just stuff that I found or purchased. I find there's a lot of stigma against assets, typically from more emerging developers. So I want to like kind of talk about them and speak to some counterpoints, I feel, that come up in those conversations. So there's a perception that like assets are kind of cheating because you're taking shortcuts or cutting corners on the process. And like a lot of teams using public game engines will use pre-made content at some point or another. Otherwise, you're making everything from the ground up every time. And that's 1, not sustainable, and 2, not really evocative or representative of what the game dev process really is. It's not just building everything from scratch yourself entirely. That's too extensive. There's kind of the argument also that assets don't help you learn from yourself because you're taking something somebody else has made and just kind of skipping the process on your own. And I think there's some merit to that, but I think not everybody can learn every part of the game development pipeline themselves. It's definitely beneficial to understand everything, to kind of have a holistic view on how things work. But even masters of their craft usually just do one thing and do one thing with using shortcuts to kind of give them time to focus on what matters most. I can't spend money on them. They're not, I don't have the cash to go around buying a bunch of assets or whatever. There's tons of free assets that you can totally leverage on like game jam projects or even your own things. They're out there. I've done it before. You don't always have to be spending money on assets to make it work. Plenty of free stuff out there, especially open source in the environment. You're in an engine like Godot, it's great because most stuff is open source, so it's wonderful. And even if you are afraid of spending that money, it's always kind of worth it because you can use a well-made asset across multiple games and multiple projects. So it ends up paying itself off over time. Obviously not everybody has the privilege to be able to do that, but it's very easy to find assets that work for you in a very flexible way. We'll go over that. But I want to speak to why use game assets in general. Typically, the biggest reason you would use a game asset versus doing something yourself is that they're tackling a lot of well-established problems that don't change radically across game genre and tend to exist for a lot of different development. So sometimes a good asset can save you a ton of time in having to do that sort of thing. So things like pathfinding, menus, humanoid rigging, things like that, where a lot of games use these ideas and people need solutions for them frequently that work and are flexible for different kinds of games. So you never need to reinvent the wheel when you're making games. You can always use stuff that more qualified people before you have built themselves. Assets are also really useful for filling a gap in your team's skill sets. Again, this is why it's very beneficial for solo developers or people who are operating on a very tight budget. Because if you're missing like a sound designer, you can just grab some sounds yourself. If you don't have a texture artist, you can kind of find a source for textures on your own without having to run out to your local park and take a bunch of photos of like leaves and bushes and grass. People have done that before you and they have them available. You can avoid burnout through clever asset use as well, because you can use them for tasks that aren't fun for you or don't come as naturally to certain people on the team. So you can kind of address those parts of the process by filling in those gaps with assets to give you more energy to focus on the things that you love and the things that you're more qualified to be doing. And some more reasons, because I think there's a lot of reasons. I kind of argue that they help you learn skills that you might not be familiar with. So they give you concrete examples of existing implementations that you can just kind of pull apart yourself and look at. So if you get like a save game framework from somewhere and you're like, I don't know how to make save games, you can look at what they did in the code and go, oh, like I understand this, and like you can kind of walk yourself through it and learn by seeing it visually if you're a very kind of example-based learner. It also just helps generally making production more efficient. A good, well-made asset can save you weeks of building your own solutions and sometimes can save a project if you don't have the bandwidth or ability to make up those weeks of time. You can just kind of implement it via an asset and it takes maybe a couple hours, what would normally take you like a very long period of time. And ultimately, video games are way too big and labor intensive. I think we've been seeing that a lot in the industry where, people get put on projects that last for so long with huge teams because everybody's just trying to make it work. And honestly, your video game is no exception to that. We're all guilty of scope creep. So assets can be a good way to let you focus on the parts of your scope that you like and not have to worry about building in complex existing frameworks already. When don't you want to use assets? Because I think there are times when you wouldn't want to necessarily. I try to avoid using assets for marketing. Things like key art, logo art, store pages, anything that sells your game, you never want to risk kind of looking cheap or low quality or kind of like cobbled together from nothing. So if you can kind of focus on that being more bespoke, it's usually to your benefit. prominent features on the same key, things like main character models, things that people will see a lot in things like trailers or during the course of gameplay. You kind of want those things to be a little more handmade and custom, just because they're usually big selling points of your game or big focuses. And whenever you can do something yourself relatively easily, I'm definitely not saying like get an asset for anything you ever have to do in your game. I don't think that's sustainable or realistic, or it's kind of just silly. If you can do it your own way and you can understand your own implementation, that's usually going to be easier for you. So you might as well do that. So finding assets for engines specifically, there's a few different resources for each engine, but the main ones are Epic has a thing called Fab, which I think used to be just the Unreal store. So if you're working on Unreal, Fab is a good way to kind of grab assets for stuff or plugins for different gameplay features. Unity has the Unity Asset Store, which works the same as Fab. Godot has an open source assets library where you can just kind of go in and see different assets and plugins that people have made and pull them into your project. It's really good for that. So if you're looking for engine specific solutions, that's usually where you turn to, and that's where you'll find a lot more like code stuff and programming sort of things. To find things more engine agnostic, there's a few different sources I'd recommend. Mixamo, I'd highly recommend for humanoid character models and rigs. They have like an auto rigger for humanoids, a bunch of like canned animations. You can really take what they have and stretch it really well. So I'd highly recommend, if you're looking into a 3D project, take some stuff, put it in Mixamo, fiddle around with it. It'll come to you very fast. Cinti is a low poly asset producer. They make a lot of very popular assets, but they're popular because they're good quality and easy to use in a lot of different kind of environments. Texture Ninja, great for 3D model textures. For code, things like shaders or even, just entire plugins or post-processing effects, GitHub is great for that. People will post a lot of stuff, little side projects they've been working on. You can find those in GitHub and use them in your own projects, providing the licensing is there. Audio, I tend to go to Freesound for audio. It's a lot of just kind of like Foley artists and musicians kind of recording samples for stuff. You can go in there, search around for something, and usually edit it here and there, and it comes out pretty well. JSFXR is they're a audio generator, so you can kind of generate kind of bit crushed or sort of low, I don't know what the word is for it, kind of chiptune-y kind of sound effects. So if you're working on something more arcadey or like a jam game, great resource for that. You can just generate things and it sounds really good. OpenGameArt is also a great reference for like everything. If you just kind of want to browse around or see if there's anything that somebody has made that they've thrown up there, highly recommend checking it out just to see what's floating around there. Finding assets is not too bad. Finding good assets can be a challenge. It can be hard to tell what is good from what is bad. So here's some tips to kind of get the most out of your asset searching. I find it's best to prioritize assets that are always designed to scale and kind of be modified, that want you to go into the code and change them around or use them a bit. Usually assets that are designed to be usable in a wider range of use cases will have more flexibility as you go. Things that are well documented are so good. You'll find you'll really quickly hit a wall if you have an asset that might be really good for one thing, but doesn't expect you to go in and change anything, because as soon as you do that, you're going through 5,000 lines of code of just, scrambled spaghetti and trying to figure it out. Speaking from experience with that one. Paid assets will also, you'll find, just be better supported, more adaptable, and typically a more worthwhile investment. Again, like a good asset can be used across many games and prototypes and kind of expects you to use it across a lot of different games and prototypes. So real emphasis on like, make sure if you see people talking about it, that they're talking about it in that context. Avoid AI. I think this goes without speaking for a lot of things nowadays, but some packs of like assets will have an absurd amount of like art, and usually those are just mass AI generated. They're not usually well like cut out, have very good quality, or like post-processing like polish on it, like the transparency, like cut out PNG background might be kind of messy. I've seen that before. And also it's important to remember that nobody can make the amount of assets that a lot of these packs are trying to sell. You'll see something like 10,000 game assets, and it's like, no, you're not. Nobody is able to make that and sell it for $5 in a way that is sustainable. There are some people who have pretty good output, but sometimes the bar is impossibly high. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And a note on asset reviews. So they're kind of a double-edged sword. I don't have to tell you how to look at reviews online. I'm sure you're used to doing that, but I notice a lot of negative reviews when it comes to assets, kind of like products sometimes, are people who have limited experience, might not know what it's for or how it's supposed to be used. And it might reflect their skill set more than the asset itself. So it's important to kind of learn to differentiate between this is bad versus I didn't understand what I was doing when I used it. Like if you look at a product on Amazon and you go, oh, this person just broke the thing themselves and then blamed the thing that they broke because of it. Stuff like that. So look for patterns, not necessarily individual reviews. Only if you see everyone saying this asset is awful, then maybe avoid it. But you'll find a lot more people who tend to dive more into specific implementation issues or things that they liked or didn't like. Once you get into specifics, then it's probably more worth listening to because it's somebody who has spent time with the asset and really kind of understands the ins and outs of why it may or may not be the best thing in the world. So here's some examples. Like you see 270 plus high quality character portraits and UI things, and there's like no reviews and it's only $15 and it looks AI generated, like, a bunch of red flags there. Safer UI cursor is a great asset I've used a lot of times on my Unity projects. Somebody says it needs to be 5-star. I totally agree. A lot of the reviews in that are pretty detailed. People talking about things they do and don't like, how it needs to be updated in some ways. Totally valid, but it seems a lot more real, and you can kind of get a good indication based on the number of reviews and what people say that it might be worthwhile investing in, even if it is only $6, $7. A brief note on copyrights and crediting. So always read the license and terms for assets that you find. This applies to any kind of asset that you're going to come across. Usually they'll have licenses. If it does not have a license, search on the asset itself and then just the website it's hosted on. A lot of asset stores will have like a standard terms of use or a limited number ones that you can kind of upload with. So you can kind of search through and find which one it's listed with. A very key thing, if a license is not explicitly listed, assume you can't use that or you don't have permission. Just because something says royalty free, free to use, doesn't mean it is. You'll see this on YouTube a lot. Things will be ripped off of, different upload sites in different places and just posted on YouTube. And they're like, oh, it's a royalty free, and it's not. They just stole it from somebody and are saying that so that people take it. This can also cause problems like DMCA takedowns for creators who might be, playing music in your game as they're streaming it. And then, oh, they get a takedown because you're not allowed to use it. Whoops. AI content is also a landmine in regards to this. Just avoid it. Don't use it. It's err on the side of caution. You don't know if anybody has the rights to generating the stuff that is in there. But a good rule of thumb generally is that if it's free, crediting is usually required or expected to some degree. Some people will say you don't have to credit me. I'd say even in that case, you should do your best effort to credit them anyways. And paid assets, on the same note, don't require crediting, but usually it's nice to do that. I wouldn't discourage anybody from doing that, definitely. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about using assets specifically in your games, and 3 big tips that I find are kind of the most helpful things to think about and keep in consideration as you work with them. I find it's most helpful to approach using assets with a learning mindset. So you want to use it to kind of help you understand more about the game development process and how certain things are put together and how they work. So again, you can kind of dig into code to understand assets that you pick up that are code-based. You can look at models in Blender, like import an FBX from something that you're working with, and just kind of see how they put stuff together, how they're using their texture maps. You can take a look at their import settings in the engine itself, just to see what sort of things that they sort of may have tweaked beforehand to kind of make the asset look how it does or do certain things visually. It's very helpful for seeing other people's process and figuring out how that might apply to things in your own game. This also, I tend to avoid things that say they just work out of the box. To me, that's actually kind of a red flag, because it means that you don't need to look at it or think about it or know how it works. And one, when you're designing a game where everything is kind of like systemic or needs to take each other into account, that's scary, because you want, if something needs to talk to that or that's affecting other things, you won't know. So, it's kind of a bad thing. Assets that often are claimed to just kind of work don't usually work in the long term in that sort of way. And sometimes assets may not work at all. That's a very real thing that might happen. So compatibility issues like version types, things like that. You might find any plethora of problems with the asset and how it works. And to that end, it kind of helps being a little comfortable with some jank. Like, I've had assets where it does not seem like they totally work, and then players get into it and play it and they go, oh, it's actually kind of fine. And like, players are okay with that jank, and I should be okay with that jank too. Just remember that like, it's an asset made for a generic use case and you're using it for your specific one. So it just might not work exactly as you want it to. As an example of what I was kind of speaking about, so bombing, as I mentioned, is kind of built on a paintable plugin. It's called Paint in 3D. It's on the Unity Asset Store. In making Bombing 1, it was very pixely. I kept everything low quality because I didn't really understand the asset. So I kind of just threw everything in there and just kind of had it work. As I mentioned, with the it just works kind of thing, which it did. But once I scaled that up in Bombing 2, I wanted to make textures larger. I wanted to change how the save system worked. And then through that, I started to get into things like the file format, the load order, the parameters of the texture, the optimization, the way that the assets were unwrapped, things like that. It really helped me both learn how Unity works even better and also how that paint system worked. And by the end of that project, I was like, wow, I could have done all this before, but I just didn't. There was so much unexplored potential that the asset had kind of taught me about building those games. And it was only possible because the asset was well documented, intended to be modified, and I'd taken the time and care to actually really dig through it and just kind of see what came out of it. Obviously, I don't think my experience was, I don't think I was skilled enough to be able to do that in the previous game, but it was just kind of interesting how that kind of came about. And that's why I think kind of expecting to learn from assets is really the best way to approach using them. Another key thing is to use art assets. I say art assets, but any assets, but using them with intention, keeping intentionality in mind as you work. This is important just for game development in general, but especially for assets, it really benefits the pipeline and the process. So you want to have your assets help you meet your specific goal for your game. So for art, for example, does it feel like your game is trying to evoke a specific look or feelings behind it? And it helps to that end to establish a visual direction and establish visual and art references. Things like style guides are very helpful. Even if you're just kind of building a small project, it really informs how you start using those assets. So you want to start thinking like an art director who's kind of directing this project with these assets to be a certain way versus a developer who's just kind of getting stuff in for content's sake. You're probably wondering why I have a bunch of weird face photos down there. So this is actually a side-by-side of Norman Rockwell's work. You can see his name down there a little bit. But on the left side, those are the reference photos that he used. And on the right side, those are the final products that he made for a magazine. He did a lot of commercial magazine paintings and illustrations. And one thing he did was he heavily used reference work because it informed a lot of the decisions he made on his commercial work. And it was really just like a pipeline thing that really kind of smoothed it all out. Having those to work from helped him push things forward and establish that style just based on the way, things naturally looked. And I bring that up because I think that's kind of part of what working with assets sort of is you're doing a lot of the same sort of stuff. You're taking, on the top two photos, you see on the left-hand side, he had the reference photo that he worked from, and on the right, he made very conscious choices about how he was going to modify that to tell the visual story or tell certain communicate certain things like body language or character or color or tone. Even just composition, you can see like some of the arms have moved and some of the expressions are different. So he took the reference and modified it to be what he wanted it to be for the final. And I guess the arrow in the bottom is not really comparative, but it's kind of the difference between taking something and just kind of using it as it is, like taking a reference photo and saying, okay, that's perfect, I'm not going to change it and I'm just going to trace over that, versus actually intentionality, like modifying things to make it work for the game experience you're trying to build. So on the left side, you have Comma Bullet Heritage, which is an old game by Narco Games. It's like a meme game that is, I think it's based on some sort of Russian meme or something. I'm not really sure. But they put a bunch of assets in their game and like it looks this jank the whole way through. It's great. I love this game, but it does visually look very incoherent because they did just kind of bring in a bunch of 3D models and just said, it's fine. And that's part of the charm, but also it doesn't have that visual coherency. On the right, you see Surround Dead by Survivor. They're making it's kind of like a Project Zomboid, like zombie shooter sort of thing, exploration, open world. And what they're actually using is Cinti assets, which I mentioned earlier. But the interesting thing is that they make a lot of conscious decisions about how they're using those assets that doesn't make it feel cheap or like they just kind of brought the assets in. So you see like the zombies have glowing eyes at night, which really helps highlight them. The nighttime gets pretty dark. They have depth of field effects that are pretty subtle, but you can still kind of see it in the background. A lot of silhouetting on some of the trees and stuff to help kind of show you the tree line, even though it's dark. When you're kind of looking at the screenshot, it doesn't feel like something that is just sort of like put out there. It feels like they put a lot of conscious decisions in how they're going to modify this thing to make those assets work for their project, which I think was very clever. Again, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds are the same thing, right? Where they're both using assets. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, I think Bennett Foddy has said that game is just an asset flip to some degree. Like you can argue that it is, but he had a very conscious series of decisions that he made where he wanted it to be hard. He wanted it to have a certain visual style to look a little like interesting and weird. And so he used those assets to kind of leverage that experience. Same with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. Like you can argue that a lot of their assets they use are just kind of 3D models or like character things that are in the game to sort of complement what already exists. But it's a realistic third person kind of shooter. And yeah, a lot of the models and assets that they used are realistic sort of environments and things to that effect. They're really kind of wouldn't have worked if they had just put some kind of stylized low poly thing in there or what have you. Like they kind of blend with the art direction that they had already established. And I mentioned a bit about blending. So blending your assets is, I think, like another really important key, at least visually, for working them in. Spending time to polish your assets can really help a lot. There's the kind of the temptation of like, oh, I don't want to touch this thing because it's an asset and I don't want to break anything or make it look different. But create new materials, make texture variants, hue shift textures so you get different colors out of them. Don't be afraid to like smooth out your geometry, add bevels to things, adjust your scales, change the color of sprites. You know, it's your asset now, like make it work for your project. Some things that I find really help a project is post-processing and visual filters. They will help assets kind of start to feel more unified with each other and avoid making it feel like things are completely discordant, at least in a visual sense. And always try to, make it work in your context. Avoid setting it and forgetting it. Don't be afraid to get in there and just change things a bit if you need to. A game that I think does this pretty well is Lethal Company. Now, granted, I suspect they use some pre-made assets in here. However, I think a lot of it is still pretty handmade, but you'll notice there's a lot of like post-processing effects. The assets themselves like aren't like the nicest, highest quality things on the planet. Like a lot of them just kind of do the job. But there's enough post-processing on it and over it that they kind of like blend it visually into like a visual style that really works for them instead of fights them. There's fog in the exteriors. They have an outline effect and like a posterization color grading that really kind of like makes things feel sharper and a little bit more like cartoony. And they have like the visor and the crack on the helmet, which is pretty cool. Stuff like that really goes a long way in giving the game one cohesive look, even if everything in it is not necessarily the most cohesive. Bombing did this too. There's a very subtle like pixel effect over everything that kind of emphasizes the already pixel nature of the art that you make in the game. The player can also adjust that to make it more or less intense, however they want. But yeah, that was kind of an intentional choice to make it, to kind of blend those assets in a bit so it doesn't look quite as discordant with each other and sort of blends a little more. On Scrub Squad as well, I also am doing something very similar where I have an outline shader that's kind of been applied to anything, and I have post-processing on each of these screenshots that is there to kind of define the initial look of the game. It was one of the first things I did when I started bringing art into it. I brought in a bunch of art assets and then went, okay, going to figure out what the post-processing looks like that can make these assets feel like a cohesive thing, even though none of them are from the same packs. So looking at some of these, I think it's probably pretty hard to tell which assets are from which packs because, you know, the post-processing is doing a lot of that work. The cartoony effect is applied everywhere, and it kind of just makes it all feel like a unified direction. So yeah, we've come to the end. You have survived the asset brief and how to combine them all together. In summary, there's really no shame in using assets to improve and focus your production. It cuts you some corners and it can save you a lot of hassle, especially sometimes it can save you weeks to months of development, which is always welcome, especially on a small team. Approach asset use with a learning and self-growth mindset and you won't go wrong. So as long as you're using those assets in a way to kind of further your growth and make sure that you're learning how these things can work for your project, awesome. You want to use assets that are more designed to scale with you in your projects rather than just work for one thing and have you set and forget. Ideally, the assets you want to kind of lean on are ones that you can change and modify as you go to really kind of build your experience out the way that you want. You want to keep intentionality of your final game and goal in mind and just chase that, especially when it comes to artistically, when it comes to visually, and even just in terms of what you're building. You want to keep that scope cohesive and leverage your post-processing and visual elements to kind of blend them together so that even though you're using things that might be of completely different shapes and cuts, they still feel like they're intentionally part of one whole thing. Thank you very much for listening. You can check out some of my links there, but I appreciate you coming to this talk and for your attention while I spoke about assets. I love assets, and I hope more people use them. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Hand-Eye Society Superfest. Bye-bye.
Phew! And that's the end of today's talks. We hope you enjoyed the festival and learned a lot. We're not done yet, though. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for more Super Festival goodness. In the meantime, be sure to check out the Super Festival website to learn more about the over 20 exhibited games we're showcasing in this year's event, more about our stream schedule, and where you can find our Tron arcade machines scattered across the city of Toronto. I'd also love to give a big shout out to our sponsors. Thank you to Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, Clever Endeavour, Charitable Gaming, the Kennedy Road Charitable Gaming Association, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto, as well as the following contributors for their support and their donations in kind, to help make Super Festival 2025 even greater. Be sure to check out the games of Super Festival, and I'll see you tomorrow for more insightful game talks. Good night, everyone!